Awesome. Awesome. We won't help them.
Yeah.
And then there's a Q&A section as well. We'll get to questions at some point, and we'll use that area for questions and the other area for comments. We'll give another minute or two for people to hop in. I'm sure Ryan will send out a message that we're live a little bit.
And we're live streaming on YouTube, I see.
Yes, we are.
Nice.
We're live streaming on YouTube as well. And these get recorded and emailed out.
Awesome.
As well at the end of it. All right. So let's hop in. So as I like to start these, just to introduce how I know you, Angie. So I don't actually know you that well, but I feel like I do because I know your work. It's like seeing an artist painting, but not knowing the artist, and then meeting the artist.
Good analogy.
So I've met, some people call me the master of analogies. I don't know why. But in any event, you've been working with someone at work who I let him know that I'll be talking a little bit about him. And
I did as well, so we have permission.
We have permission from Mendy.
Yes.
So Mendy, who I work with, has been a longtime employee at JEG, the company I've been running since 2006. And just seeing the change in him over the last number of months, physically as well, dropping a number of pounds, but also just seeing what he's done at the office. Mendy has always been tremendously loyal and has an incredible work ethic. But Mendy has also outed me and outed himself. He has a talk on YouTube that's been seen by thousands of people where he talks about me getting frustrated to the point that I punched a hole through a wall. And one thing I can say is that I haven't so much as slammed the door since he's been working with you. So that's some progress.
Go, Mendy.
All kidding aside, I think that in terms of making money, there's one is how productive someone can be, right? Money is, in essence, the value someone is bringing into society, typically, right? Is how much value is something bringing into society, and that's how much money they're able to bring back, right? Figure out how to get electric vehicles on the road efficiently that customers like, and there's a lot of value in that, and that suddenly money is returned to that person. Mm-hmm. So the first element is how much can someone produce themselves, and the second is how much can they, for lack of a better word, get others to produce for them, and that's leadership, right? And that's something that I've really noticed in Mendy in the last 6 or 12 months is his ability to inspire, motivate, manage, and lead others. So thereby not only bringing more value to the company, more value to himself, but more value to other people as well. And but before we go into that, which this topic is one that's, I guess, a passion of mine. I speak often about the importance of personal development as a pathway to business development. And I'm going to separate what I mean during this. I think it would be helpful for people to know a little bit about your story. I'm interested in knowing, but also for the audience as well.
Sure.
So who you are, how you got into coaching, and was it a straight line?
Oh, no. I always say progress is not linear. My story is very much telling of that. I'll discuss the highlights just because I feel they'll be relevant to the intention that we want to communicate today. So I did start my private coaching business a little over 5 years ago. So I've been doing what I do now for a little over 5 years. It's private. So I work with clients one-on-one. And then what I'll do also is corporate as well. So if someone were to hire me for their employees for me to conduct a workshop or a seminar of some sort, it's something that I do. And right now I'm currently in the process of scaling the business. So I love one-on-one. I think it's great, but I think we all know at some point you do cap out. And I'll always do it just because I do particularly enjoy it. But I definitely want to expand a little bit more. So that's currently where I'm at as far as business. And then what led me there was actually, and I think I mentioned on the phone when we spoke about a little bit about my story, what helped me, I think, evolve into the person that I am now and get very clear on what it is that I had to do. It's not even that I wanted to do it, I had to do it, was do the thing and provide the thing that was not available to me when I was 21 years old, and I was chronically, clinically depressed, and went on that journey for about 2.5 to 3 years, and then developed a binge eating disorder as a result. So that thing that I always say that was needed, and it's still needed. I still get passionate. Let's use the word passionate when I don't see people in companies or in schools or in teams, anything required teamwork, utilize, access, or even acknowledge the fact that emotional intelligence exists. So I think it's a very big component of personal development. And
can we define this before?
Absolutely.
Can we define the term emotional intelligence?
Yes. So we're all used to hearing the term IQ, right? Which is completely separate. EQ is what emotional intelligence is referred to as, or a lot of people use EI. So emotional intelligence is defined as being aware of my own emotions, as well as the emotions of those in my environment. And then you use both of them, okay, as data and how to proceed forward. So you use all of that information to guide your decisions, actions, and behaviors. So as it says there, me and you, it's meaning it's not just about me. I have to take into account my environment. And these are the tools.
Is there a way for someone to measure their emotional intelligence like they could with IQ?
So there aren't actual tools. I think it's more if you're able to, for example, cultivate a skill of some sort and use it like in crisis management. Like empathy is a big one that's cultivated in emotional intelligence, as to very telling of it when you can actually observe, seek to understand, get curious, ask questions, and then come to a solution. So it's a difference between responding and reacting, if that makes sense. Yeah. So, and it's Daniel Goleman is the father of emotional intelligence. So if anybody wants to look up anything on their own, as far as like when it started, he's the guy that you want to look up. And he'll tell you they're developing, from what I last read, tools to be able to measure. But right now it's just more 5 skills, so to speak, that he likes to talk about when it comes to emotional intelligence. And he says if you have these 5 down packed, which are self-regulation, self-awareness, intrinsic motivation, empathy being one of them, and social skills. If you have some sort of awareness of those, you're good. And you can see that a lot in team dynamics. You can see that a lot at the workplace. You can see that a lot in relationships, basic relationships with people. So I like to also in my sessions utilize these tools. Like once my client learns them, we use them firsthand in our conversations. So like I can really see the difference in that from the outside looking in, as wow, our conversations look a lot different now. I can call you out on something right away and you don't take it personal. You know what I mean?
Okay, so
yeah.
Yes.
So as far as my,
so that would be
my
a measure
story
of
goes,
emotional intelligence.
Right
the ability
away.
to take feedback. Got it.
Yeah. So my story started then.
Something tells me that punching a hole through a wall is not high emotional intelligence.
Absolutely not. However, I'm happy you didn't break your hand. So this was something that I became very passionate about because it wasn't available to me. I didn't even know it existed as an option. So here I go, graduating from the University of Miami, thinking that, what I had to do was, work in corporate. And, there's nothing wrong with corporate. It's just I knew it wasn't for me and I did it anyway. And that made my depression so much worse. And, I chose to invest a few years after, around the age of 24. That was when I met Mike Rosenfeld.
Cool.
Just by going to a workshop, and it's interesting because here I am attending these workshops that are basic. And even the basic stuff, I started to hear it. I'm like, why did they never teach me this in school? Why am I hearing about this for the first time? And so the intrigue started to peak, and I saw him after the workshop. I'm like, we have to work together. You need to help me figure out what I'm going to do.
That's
So
awesome. How many of those listening were at the workshop with Mike Rosenfeld we did together a couple weeks ago on anxiety? If you were, just type this punch in one. I'm just
yes.
curious how many have seen that.
Nice.
Okay, so we got some new attendees on this one. A couple who were there. That's on YouTube for those interested. Mike and I, with a rabbi who I have a lot of respect for, Rabbi Shays Taub, the three of us spoke about anxiety. So you met Mike at the time. Just you were depressed, and I'm guessing binge eating. You were maybe a little overweight as well.
I was 48 pounds heavier than I am now. Yeah, that was true story. And people are like, I can't believe it. And I show the picture and they're like, you weren't kidding. I'm like, nope, I wasn't. And, that's what I used to self-soothe. So it made everything so much worse. And then as I started to work with Mike, invest in my personal development, I started to see another side to things that I didn't even know existed before. So the question that I asked myself when I graduated from was, is it really that this is it? This can't be it. You just graduate, go to work. And, it didn't feel right. And so I'm known as like the black sheep of my family. I'm actually the first entrepreneur in my family. And so when they heard what I was doing, they were like, you're crazy.
Wouldn't that be the white sheep of the family?
Well, according to them, it's very black.
I got it.
They expected me to do medicine or law. That was just what was expected because my family's full of doctors and lawyers. So that was just what was expected.
Okay. So going in that direction had you depressed, binge eating, and then through the course of personal development, you charted your own career with this coaching career, which is growing.
Correct. Absolutely. If it wasn't for the fact that I made that decision to invest in my personal development, I can tell you that my life wouldn't look the way it does right now. I can tell you that much. And I love my life right now. So I guess the
question for this, right? The question to explore in this webinar is that the path for people who even stay within corporate, right? Obviously, if you're going to coaching, you're going to need to work on some of that personal development stuff. Anecdotally, I believe that's the case, but I've also seen certain things in my own experience that have worked against that, right? So I don't like to come on here and say, personal development is the key to making money, because I would say also, you had mentioned low emotion intelligence, a sign of not taking feedback well. I used to be able to work for 2 to 4 weeks, energized strictly on envy. So if I saw someone who was doing something in business that made me feel a little bit less than, that can supercharge me. I can do 18-hour days for a month. And when I started doing some of the work on myself, I lost that edge for sure.
Now, let me ask you a question. How did that impact you as far as using that to, I guess, help you create the money? But I feel like it was at the expense of something. For
sure. It's certainly at the expense of happiness, right? If I'm at that place that no matter what I do, I could feel envious, jealous, less than, insecure when I see someone more successful, then I'm always going to be there, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, it's just whether eventually I'm going to run into someone that has more. And if that's going to bring me down, so I'm not feeling as good, but it certainly helps for motivation. I feel like doing some of the work on myself. I don't know if you ever heard the line, the price for security is insecurity.
Yeah.
And oftentimes to become very successful, I'm talking, hundreds of millions or billions, to become very, very successful, one needs to feel that lack always. It would be difficult to be motivated. At some point in time, say, okay, I have enough. Let me focus on something else. So I wonder about that sometimes, if there's certain work that can stifle motivation, but there's no question that most of us, when we're talking about work and earning money, are looking for peace of mind, and being able to be thrown off by someone who has more doesn't contribute to peace of mind. So, working through some of those insecurities is not a bad idea for peace of mind, but might it be a bad idea for money?
So, I guess my 2 cents on that, because I see where you're going with that. And I think that's a very valid point to make. I think that, when, in this case, the envy, I think that when that becomes destructive is when I would, start to look at that emotion as something that is modifying you away from the desired outcome. Because I'm a fan of, like, I like to use my feelings and emotions to kind of like get me going, right? But ultimately, if I know my path requires decision making, the most effective decisions are made when you are the most neutral, in my opinion. So it's
Right.
about not getting too high and not getting too low. So
I
that's
hear
just
what you're
kinda how
saying.
I
You're
see
saying that, right, being in that place, that's a valid point. While it could get me in the office for 18 hours a day
Right.
and motivated simply by, the fact that I saw someone driving a nicer car than me or anything that can throw me off, at the same point in time, it might lead to impulsive decisions that's away from my goal. Versus if I have a clear goal and I'm able to maintain neutrality as much as possible, I can stay focused on that and work towards that goal. I hear that.
You said it.
I can give the flip side of that. I was at a Tony Robbins seminar a few years ago, and it was the toughest period of the time in my business.
Okay.
I started my business young. I started it when I was a little before my 20th birthday, and relatively quickly I had success, certainly success for a 19 or 20-year-old. And year over year, it grew up until, and that was for probably the first 11 or 12 years. And then the same year I was getting married, the business was spiraling pretty badly. And I didn't know if there was a connection there. Intuitively, I felt like there may be, but I wasn't sure. And when I went to a Tony Robbins seminar, two of the guys I work with said they're going, and we thought it'd be a good idea to go. I was going more for the camaraderie aspect and expecting to get a tremendous amount from one of his seminars, but I actually did get this. And that was, he does something, I don't know if you're familiar with the Dickens pattern or the Dickens process. Are you familiar with this?
No.
But what he does is he takes you through a series of work to identify beliefs, self-defeating beliefs, I think is what he calls it, or the 3 beliefs that are holding you back. And I forget exactly what he used to get there, but then he says, okay, let's pick one of those beliefs. And on it, he does something called the Dickens pattern. The Dickens pattern is based on some sort of movie about Christmas. There was someone where they took one of the characters. I haven't seen the movie, but he explained it there, where he takes them through, they take the person through, I think it's the guy Dickens, through a process where, okay, this is where your life is leading with this belief, and this is where your life could go in the other direction. And Tony Robbins takes you through that process, and he has the whole theater screaming and yelling and imagining, okay, what's the worst scenario of this belief? And if you're able to abolish that belief, what might be the best case scenario of that? And try to put that right into stark focus and not pretend that this belief isn't as dangerous as it is, but to really see how your life will go 5, 10, 15, 20 years with this belief. And the belief I identified through this process was that raising kids with money screws them up. And I don't know where I got this belief.
Interesting.
But I had it. And as I was starting a family, what made the most sense with that belief was losing money because I didn't want to screw kids up. And when I went through the pattern, I realized that poverty screws up a lot more kids than wealth, right? We're being completely honest. And while it's certainly a challenge, and there's a lot of articles, right? There's a lot of studies I've seen of much higher drug use in the very successful children and a much more difficult time finding meaning and things like that. There's no question that poverty is much dangerous to raise kids with. And there I saw a practical way that personal development translated to business growth. And several months after that seminar, I saw noticeable changes in the business. And I attribute a lot of it, not only to that, but a lot of it to that personal work I did at that workshop. So I have 2 very different anecdotes here personally, one which reduced competitiveness and work ethic, and one which increased work and financial stability by recognizing a belief through a personal development workshop.
Okay. That reminds me a lot of the subconscious reprogramming work that I believe his name is Joseph Murphy. He wrote The Power of the Subconscious Mind. According to your belief, is it done to you? So the book is amazing because it talks about even people who have illness or who are very sick and how they were able to heal themselves once they started to reframe and then reprogram their limiting belief systems. So that's, there's a portion in my curriculum where I teach, it's an exercise called the LCR, stands for Look, Challenge, Replace, where the whole time I'm working with the client, I take notes of things they say over and over again. And sometimes I'll do this quietly for about a year. I've done it with several people for about a year, because we don't reach that until we do other stuff. And then I'll bring it up and I'll ask them, does this reflect your reality? And I'll read them back to back. And they are like, wow. Because now they can understand when they hear it back, why it's such a problem. Right. Whereas a lot of people, if I pose it before, they'll find a way to rationalize it. Oh, but it's true. Come on, I know you know it's true. Like, come on, I know, they'll find a way. But
can you give an example?
Sure. Something as simple as, money can't buy happiness. I do this a lot with money because I did a lot of money workshops this past year to improve people's money story. Save all your pennies for a rainy day. Money doesn't grow on trees. All relationships, or here's another one, love equals pain. I hear that often. Love equals pain. So, and these are just more of the simple ones that I see across the board. I had one myself that I love to use this example because I just worked through it last year. And the belief was, it's always something. And it related to my relationship. And I know this is going to sound very funny, but everyone that knows me well knows that I have a cat who is like my child. So Addie, my cat, is very dear to me. She's the only pet that I have. I've had her now for 6 years. And unfortunately, she has asthma. Who thought that was a thing, right? So, she needed to be on meds and stuff to manage it, a lot of prednisone and things like that. It's the only thing that worked. And I got so sick of giving her this medicine because ultimately I felt like I was killing my cat. And I didn't want to have her on that long term just because it's the only thing that worked. So I did my research and I found this amazing homeopathic vet in Boca, Dr. Anthony Krawitz. He's the best. And we started on a homeopathic journey. And she's doing very well. But homeopathy is very tricky because you have to find that thing that adjusts to the body and fits like a glove. And it's to her chemistry, her composition. So nevertheless, there have been a lot of setbacks. So in one of the biggest setbacks that we had last year, I lost my shit. And I'm like, it's always something. And at the same time, I was having some stress and some issues in my relationship. Right. And again, it's always something. So I was having a conversation with my trainer, who's also a coach. And, I'm kind of like venting to him about this. And he said to me, the other day we were talking about the things that never stress you out, your health and money. And that every time that you have a stressor around those two areas, it lasts for like a day or two because it immediately like gets fixed. Whatever's going on, it goes back to its default. And I looked at him and I'm like, you're right. I always talk about money and my physical health with such, it's not positivity, it's my belief systems. They promote the abundance in those two areas because I have such sound belief systems in that area. But with the other two, it's always something. So what happens?
What's the other two?
It was my relationship and my cat, my Addie's health. So what's going to happen? Those belief systems, since that's what your subconscious mind believes to be true, it's going to go back to its default, which is that it's always something. So, man,
I want to be clear what you're saying. You're saying that when you're working with a client, you'll start picking up on certain things that they say, which suggest certain beliefs that they have around certain areas. So in your case, with you in these two areas, both with the health of your cat and with relationships, there was this belief that was there, that it was always something.
Always something, yeah.
And then there was, in fact, always something.
Always, yeah. And I'm going to tell you something, and I'm not exaggerating. Ever since I took a look at that, I started to do some work around it. I can say that's no longer true. It's not always something. She's been great. And every time she's had a challenge or I have had a challenge in my relationship, I go to my tools and, it just seems a lot more seamless because I don't expect it anymore. It's kind of like, oh, this came up. Let me take care of it. And so now it's a lot different because those belief systems don't run the show anymore. And that's what I love to help people understand, that according to your belief, is it done to you? Your reality will match it 100% of the time.
Do you think that's a spiritual thing, or it's actually something someone's physically creating?
I think it's both. Yeah,
Both.
I think it's both. And I've seen it happen with illness, with people I've worked with. Now, I don't mean that they just sit there all day and they're like, I'm healed, I'm healed, I'm healed. But there's a lot to that I think it's both. And in this book, it talks about how the chemistry of your body and the composition, everything can change just by doing a lot of this work over time.
Got you. I want to talk about the patterns that you see when you're working with people and how they show up professionally, right? So we spoke a little bit about Mendy, who we both know. Are there certain patterns you see in general that affect people specifically in their workforce? And if so, what do you notice?
So a little bit of the foundation in my coaching is something called, and I say a little bit because there's another part to it, but this one I'm referring to is called primary food. So
primary food?
Yes, primary food.
Okay.
So an easier way to think about primary food is like soul food. So we all have them. There's 4. Your relationships, your spirituality, your career, and your physical activity. So if there's a deficit in one to all of them, you'll see, for example, your nutrition be affected. In other cases, if there's a deficit in one, you'll see that other primary foods are affected. So my point is, when there's not like a homeostasis in all 4, something's being negatively affected. So what I do see often in a lot of the executives that I work with is that they'll actually have a career primary food that is very, very high, and relationships and physical activity will be very low. So one of my first cases was, he was actually the second male I worked with my first year of coaching. Great guy. He is a CPA, owns his own firm. He wrote on his consultation form, hours of work per week, about 80. Now, when I see that,
I guess typical for an accountant, yeah.
And I see that too, and I want to get curious. I want to know a little bit more. I want to know the dynamics of your work environment. Is it just seasonal? Is it so? I got curious, and he immediately was like, "Well, she's probably asking me this because it's so out of left field, and it doesn't mean that I hate my job or I'm a slave to my job." And he was explaining himself when I asked him, "No, this doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with my job. Like, I love my job. It gives me so much validation. It gives me so much energy. It's like, my dream job." And, and I asked him, I said, hey, hold on. I just want to know what contributes to it being so many hours, meaning like above 50, 60. Is it seasonal? Is it a tax season thing? He's like, no, it's pretty much all the time. But again, I'm very satisfied in my career primary food. I'm coming to you for issues in my marriage, and I've gained 37 pounds. And I said, okay. So then after going through consultation with him, I asked him, before I tell you what I think and how we should proceed, out of all 4 primary foods, which one do you think is the most imbalanced? And he's like looking at his belly. Then he, starts talking about his wife, and he's like, honestly, I'm going to have to say it's my marriage. And I said, that is incorrect. It's actually your career. And he was like, why would you say that? And I said, well, because your career is so extreme, it's at the expense of the other 2, especially your marriage. And that right there was like, he actually got kind of emotional and was just like, if I don't, he's like, if I don't hear that from an objective party, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing because I'm so happy and fulfilled. But in reality, it's creating more damage. And he is exhibit A of what I see often with a lot of people in the corporate world.
So what you're seeing there is actually success, right? Meaning in one area, right? In that primary food of career, he built up his own firm and he was successful. So when he was coming to you, he was looking for, that's what people like to call the work. He wasn't even looking for work-life balance. He wasn't even thinking of it in that way. He was just
saying,
like,
I got to lose a little weight and I got to work on my relationship and things like that, because it's like things are just really bad at home. And so, you know, it was kind of cool.
This is actually a good example. So when he was working with you, I'm guessing he lost weight.
Not at first.
Okay.
Not at first, but eventually he did.
Did he at some point?
Yes.
Okay. Did he start making less money as he started bringing in some of those other primary foods? What happened to his career?
No, he didn't. He found a way to hire, outsource, work smarter, not harder, because he also had a belief that no one can do it like me.
Oh, right. I know that one.
Of course you do. And I know it so well, which is why I haven't hired an assistant, and I probably should. And everybody tells me all the time. Yeah, so that was a big belief system for him. And I'm like, do you see how all these things connect? So, yeah.
Okay, so in his case, I actually can see that quite clearly. Right, in his case, I can see it quite clearly. So he was coming in with another frustration, but in addressing that, he didn't have to lose, right? By doing some of the personal development work, he didn't have to, right? Without addressing, I guess what I'm saying is without addressing that underlying belief is no one can do it like I can do it, which I want to address that head on, because that was certainly one of mine. Actually, and the truth is that actually people can do it a hell of a lot better than you can do it.
That is correct.
So that's the truth. And that's what I've found is that the skill of being a business owner, there are certain things you have to do. And oftentimes it's making decisions in areas of unknown and having the ability to shoulder a certain amount of responsibility and see around corners and things like that. But for the most part, the skill of a business owner as you get to a certain point is getting the right people in place and putting the right team together. And it shouldn't be too hard to find someone better than you at all aspects of the business. That's what I've found, especially when you get to the point of working 18 hours a day and you're stretched thin, then it's very easy to start, making mistakes and screwing something up.
You have an excellent, and I mean, he's an employee, but he's also like a partner and a teammate, and you have an excellent teammate in Mendy. So I can see that firsthand. I'm not even doing it to toot his horn. It's just, he's the definition of loyal.
He does, right? As an example, he does his job better than I would do his job. And I try to have that in every area of the company, because you're typically going to find someone who does a specific thing better than you can. Obviously there are certain people who are very skilled in certain things, and maybe in the example of a CPA, right, really good at a certain understanding of the law or certain complex analysis. But let's say it comes down to being responsive to customers or making sure things are filed on time. Or there's 90% of the work, there's no question that there are people that can do it better and more reliably. You can. And where unfortunately, this was the case with me, and it's the case with most entrepreneurs I see, or even not entrepreneurs, even managers and businesses, it gets to the point where they really start screwing, or, in my case, really start screwing things up and saying, oh, I'm actually not doing such a good job. Let me learn to delegate. So, right. And that definitely for me came from, quote unquote, the personal development work.
I have a question about, since you're bringing up your teams and people who work for you, with you, and you're creating these teams, do you look for an alignment of values, and excuse my French when I say this, or people who just give a fuck, or the combination of both?
In terms of hiring?
Yeah, in terms of creating like your team, the people who work under you and help you and all that.
So what do I look for in the
Like is there one that's more important than the other, or is it really a combination of having people who are in alignment with your values, your value system, and who also really care as much as you do?
I have to think about that. Or what are those things I found that work? When I look at hiring in general, and I've read a ton of books on it and everything else, and a lot of analysis, and we use all sorts of tools. Unfortunately, even the best aren't that good at hiring, so I'm not going to pretend I'm very good at it. I don't know that there are many that are. It's very tough to know someone until you've worked with them. But there are things that we found over time that work well. And a lot of it is culture based. So for example, in our organization, there's a lot of autonomy, and everyone says they want it, but not everyone wants autonomy. A lot of people want to know exactly what to do, to come in the morning. It's like, this is what I do now. This is what I do next. This is what I do next. This is what I do next. So those are things that over time people have risen to the top who are able to develop that. Complacency is the greatest cancer in an organization. And I think it's much harder to run an organization that's doing well than an organization that isn't, right? So for example, people who get complacent over time, that's a very tough one. I find it very difficult. I tell my people often, you won't see my ego until I see yours, right? And that's something that I find that there are certain people in companies, and that's like, I think value is I really try to have people who make the people around them better. I use a lot of sports analogies, and you see it. You see some athletes who make their teammates better for whatever reason. It's sometimes an intangible, or sometimes it's a very specific skill, right? They're very good at passing, but usually it's an intangible. And that's something that I look for tremendously, because I think one person can do very little in an organization. So what you really need is the team. And if someone has the ability to bring people up around them by 10, 15%, then they can have that impact on 20 people. That's a lot better than having one strong employee.
I agree.
Who they may be very productive, but they're bringing people down by 10 or 15%. I would say those are the things that I look for most.
Have you read Relentless from Tim Grover?
I started it. Is it Michael Jordan's coach?
Yeah. Great book.
Yeah, I got through a little bit. I found his style a little bit tough to read.
And a lot of people do. You're not the first person to say that. For some reason, the way he communicates, expresses himself, has his analogies, it really worked for me. And so I relate to that whole philosophy of like cleaner, cooler, closer. So, I always use that analogy in my sessions, because at some point I'll recommend for my clients to read the book. And,
can you explain it? Cleaner, cooler, closer?
So let me see, because he uses a lot of analogies in it. So he has 2 pages where he'll do cooler, cleaner, closer in many different areas. So let me see if I can remember the one about competition. I think he says a cooler worries about his competition. A closer studies his competition. And a cleaner has the competition study him.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Do you want me to say it again?
So make it practical for me.
Yes. So it's basically like cleaners aren't worried about their competition because they're so confident and certain in themselves and their team that is what makes their competition scared of them. And their competition is then constantly like studying them and trying to figure out what their next moves are. They're not busy studying the other competition.
Right. So instead of obsessing about their competition, they're obsessing about themselves. I guess this goes back to the earlier point, right? If I'm where I spoke about the envy and the jealousy as mm-hmm. 8-10 years ago as something that can motivate me for a few weeks. Okay, so that'd be an example. It works, but it's not optimal, right? The cleaner is a lot. The cleaner is motivated on being the best that they can be. I'm breaking up. You're not hearing me? I hear you.
Okay, try again.
You're not hearing me?
I hear you on a huge delay.
Really? That's concerning.
Yeah. So like I see your mouth moving, and then eventually it comes out.
And then you're hearing me later.
Yeah. Let me see. Try again.
Okay. Okay. As long as you're able to hear me.
It's fine. It's fine. Go for it. Go for it.
Yeah. The audio connecting.
That's okay.
Something else. But I guess the cleaner and closer, going back to the earlier analogy that I gave about, not our analogy, the anecdote that I gave about myself, where I could live off, Mark Twain said, I can live off a good compliment for 2 weeks, right? I can live off a little bit of envy. I can work off a little bit of envy for 2 to 4 weeks. So in that anecdote, you're saying, okay, that is a level, right? But that's the closer, not the cleaner.
Right.
Right. So Jordan was the cleaner. It's what he.
Yeah. He was never worried about the star of the other team or what they were doing or what their secret weapons were. He was just always focused on like, the 40 whatever minutes he had in front of him, and because of how he operated that way, people always wanted to, I guess, anticipate his moves. They wanted to know what they were getting into. If someone did this or covered him like this, they wanted to know what to do in those situations. And he was unpredictable. Ultimately, it's almost like it wasn't enough to do that. So I don't know. I'm not it's not that I'm a big MJ person. I just really resonated with that philosophy of what separates each one and what it takes to be a cleaner. And he says that there's very few cleaners in the world. He also called Kobe a cleaner.
I think Jeff Bezos said something like this. Jeff Bezos said that if you're worried about your competition, you'll only be as good as your competition. But if you focus on the customer is never satisfied. The customer always wants more and always wants better. So it's always holding you to a higher and higher standard.
I love that. I love that a lot because it goes hand in hand with what I like to teach people about empathy. And Gary Vee is very big on empathy, so much that he named his wine after empathy. But that is when he is asked the same question, what do you attribute your success to? What do you attribute your following to? All these people that they adore you and they follow you and they're loyal to you. And he's like, one word, empathy. To be able to understand what my customer needs, what my client, the problems they're experiencing, what their pain points are. I'm seeking to understand their inner world and their inner reality. Therefore, because I'm listening and I'm understanding, and if I don't, I figure it out, then I can create the most effective solution, the most effective service, the most effective product, because it's going to cater precisely to that pain point. And then not only are they being heard, but they're being understood. And ultimately, that's what most people want. Even over being loved, there's a quote that says to be loved is great, but to be understood is profound. So I love that. I'm a big empathy enthusiast.
So, right. And you mentioned that as one of the 5 elements that Daniel Goleman talks about in emotional intelligence. Mm-hmm. Right. So having high empathy in that way, really understanding what it is the customer wants, sometimes being able to be one step ahead of the customer allows you to create a product and continuously refine a product, right? Customers do always want better. It's true. What he's saying, right? We're not satisfied. We're thrilled at one point when we can order a product and get it in 2 days. And now 2 days is just routine. If we can't get it in 2 days, I don't even want to order it.
Yeah.
Right.
That's what they're used to now.
Now we want it in 4 hours or an hour for a lot of products. So I'm curious about something, and then I want to get back to the business side of things. You had mentioned the CPA you worked with, and I asked you if he lost weight at first. Mm-hmm. If he lost weight, you said no, not at first, but then afterwards he did. Mm-hmm. I'm sure a lot of people, I mean, I certainly do. I can fluctuate 20, 25 pounds relatively easily. Mm-hmm. What do you see certain things from a emotional development or personal development side that holds people back from losing the weight and maintaining it for a while? Are there certain patterns that you see amongst? Yeah,
definitely. The biggest source in my opinion, and it is what I see across the board, is inflammation. So I say that from not just like a medical standpoint, but just even looking at a person. Anything causes inflammation as far as the foods you eat and what you feel. So as soon as cortisol levels rise and then they stay that way, meaning it becomes chronic, you now enter into something, or could enter into something called adrenal fatigue. And a lot of people are walking around today not knowing that they have that. That in and of itself creates tremendous inflammation in the body, where even if you're eating clean foods, the weight, it won't fall, it won't drop, because of the cortisol and the adrenal fatigue. So being able to bring things back down to zero, learning how to respond and not react, being able to identify when you're creating a story and you're not able to see things from what they are. If you're able to do that, your stress can go down a tremendous amount, because a lot of people get stressed out about things that aren't even real because they
So
suffer
you're not even
from.
you're not even talking about stress eating.
Yeah, no.
You're talking about stress
in
just the
general.
body's emotional response to stress.
Yeah. And then the eating is a result of that.
Well, sure, right? Stress eating, I understand how that can put on weight, but you're saying something else, right? You're saying stress.
Yeah. I've seen people.
Even with eating healthy.
Yeah.
That can hold.
It doesn't work until that starts to come down to like homeostasis of some sort. So with this guy, when he came to me, the reason I said not at first was because he was doing all the right things, but still living from that stressful place, where until he started to interrupt his habits, which is where you interrupt a habit through a routine, was really when you started to see the weight drop. Because the habits now, a lot of the habits that he had, he thought were working for him because they were creating money. And it was the way I've always done things. So there was like an attachment to that. However, it brought about a lot of stress. So he had to little by little interrupt them and then replace whatever he interrupted with something that promoted his desired outcome, but still decreased the stress. When the stress started to come down, the weight started to come down and inflammation started to decrease. Now, I'm simplifying it. There's a lot that went into that, but nevertheless, that's what happened as far as like a 1, 2, 3 in order. That couldn't have happened until that first thing happened.
I sometimes see people lose weight from stress.
If they don't eat. Right. Yeah. So I've gone through two huge events in my life that I always say changed my DNA. They were very traumatic and I could barely eat. I had no appetite. And what happens when stress affects you in that way is that it can have an adverse effect on your appetite hormones, which, in case you guys want to know, they're called leptin and ghrelin. One is responsible for hunger. The other one is responsible for how full you are. They can go out of whack if your cortisol increases dramatically as well. So where I see people stress eating is when they are eating to fill a void. It's more an
example of the kind of void someone would.
So when someone's addicted to something, it's more of I'm not addicted to the thing, food. I'm addicted to the feeling that thing gives me. So then where is that missing from your life? Right? And then we'll see the deficits in those 4 areas when we start to talk about what is it that you're trying to create. Oh, just like validation or fulfillment or a support system. And I'll hear people who are addicted to food, which I could relate to back then. Food is just always there for me. It's convenient. I don't have to like work for it. It doesn't talk back to me. It doesn't tell me what to do. It's like there for me when I need it. That's how people will talk about food. I'm currently working with a client in her 50s who has an addiction to pizza, but it's a real addiction. Like it's now gotten to the point where it's causing her problems. She owns a business and it's now leaking into that because of how she feels every single day. And by the way, it was
every day?
Close to. And this is the catch, right? We're all different. Something that's contributing to this is the fact that she's very self-aware. We've been working together now for over a year. She's like, I'll tell you right now, it's making it worse. The fact that I eat it and I'm not bloated the next day. So
that makes it worse?
No, it's just if she sees it, well, yeah, it makes it worse in that it almost like promotes the habit, because if she sees herself start to like inflate like a balloon, she's going to want to stop
Right. Then she's
doing
less
it
likely
more.
to do it the next day.
Yeah. So now so she in her mind, that's what's kind of like making it okay right now. So um, that's an example. And for her, this started for her because of quarantine and the pandemic. That was how she started to self-soothe.
Got it. So when you're working with a client, you're identifying these four, what you call soul foods or primary foods, and then based on that, seeing where there might be a deficiency or an overcorrection, and then try to get those four into balance. So you're not necessarily always working with someone on one area or another, because if you feel like that area is okay, you'll pay attention to the other areas.
And a lot of times where they think that there's a huge issue, there is, but there's probably a bigger issue elsewhere. So I like to talk about all four and kind of see what's going on. Yeah.
Okay, cool. I'm curious if there are any questions from those listening in. I'd like to get into a little bit of the some of the business side of things, and one of the things I'm curious about. So if anyone has any questions, just in the Q&A section to punch in a question there. But one of the things I'm curious about is I'm a massive proponent of personal development as a pathway to growing a business. It's been important, and not only growing a business, but growing a career. It's something that I've not only invested in myself, but also in the company. I mean, as probably 8 or 9 years ago, we had a psychologist who was practically on staff and worked with a lot of people. And Mike, who you know, spent nearly 2 years in the company working with a lot of different people. And I'm glad to see that the thought I had rubbed off on Mendy to the point that he reached out to you directly, right, and set up coaching outside of the company. So that's something that I certainly I'm a big proponent of, but also the personal development field is relatively broad. So if someone is noticing that as an area that they want to work on, are there things that you see specifically? I know you've mentioned emotional intelligence, but these are areas to focus on as far as personal development is concerned, as a way to jumpstart their career. Get to the next.
I think that purpose is one of the front runners when it comes to answering that question. And it's not so much, and this is my opinion, it's not so much that I think that everyone has a purpose and they need to find their purpose. I think what's more important for me is to ensure that they are living a purpose-driven life. So if they are not hungry about something or feel driven towards something, I'll ask them if that's something that they're interested in, or are they being complacent and comfortable and so to speak. However, when I talk about purpose, I talk about it in that context of living that type of life. And so that's something that immediately we'll begin to work on too. Even if they are fulfilled, it's like what comes next type of conversation, where it's like, what are you moving towards? And Tony Robbins talks about this all the time. If you don't have a compelling vision of some sort, that's typically why people get stagnant and frustrated and depressed. So I like to ensure firsthand, and I feel it's important for personal development, that a client, an individual, feels that they are moving towards something. And if they don't know what that is, let's explore that together.
I'm going to challenge that a little bit, just in the sense that it could be somewhat vague. And not only it could be vague, it could be very difficult for someone to access that. Like, I feel like I've been working on that for 10 or 12 years, and there's a purpose, and then something feels right, and then it doesn't quite. So there is a quality of it that's never ending, number one.
Yeah, that's true.
Two,
I agree
and then
with
it's somewhat intangible. It's hard to put a finger on, and where do I start? If I'm looking for purpose, where do I start? And oftentimes someone can't find it in their career. If they're at a stage where they need a certain amount of money to survive, then going out in search of purpose and not finding food isn't right, could be a little bit difficult. There's a time, where there's a time where someone feels like they're in the financial position to do that purpose search. Can I offer an alternate and tell me what you
let's do
what
it.
you think? So I would say the two that I found that are most, my people at work, what I think that they should invest in the most, usually fall into these two categories, and there is somewhat of a connection between the two. One is confidence, confidence building, and the other is communication. And communication can take on several different forms. It could take on, the obvious, just being a better writer, being a better speaker, being more comfortable speaking in front of larger groups. Yeah. But what I really mean by that is how to effectively get your message across to an audience. What is it that I'm trying to say? How is it that I want to move someone? And sometimes that's one-on-one. I want to get someone to work harder towards an idea. Other times it's 1-on-50. And I found that those two areas, I've done work in a lot of different areas of my life, some that have decreased motivation, some that have work motivation, some that have possibly not increased the bottom line or my bottom line. But the two that I found always have is anything involved in communication, just being a better communicator. I think Warren Buffett says that as well, that the single best, most important skill of any leader is the ability to communicate. Yeah. And the other is confidence. And I find that a lot is that people can be very skilled, but it's difficult to progress in an organization if you don't have confidence and don't show confidence.
Right. I agree with that. There's a saying that says, when you have certainty, you have influence. So I'm totally on board with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In terms of communication, has that been part of, you speak publicly, right?
Yeah, I do. And
has that been part of your development?
Yes, not intentionally, believe it or not. So just really quick, the reason I agree with the communication one 100%. I guess it falls into my emotional intelligence part. So that's why I didn't even think about it. That's just, you learn EQ, you got to learn how to communicate. So 100% on board with that. I actually, and it's funny, people will go to my workshops and I'll say this and they'll come after and tell me, how is this true? Kind of like with the whole weight loss thing. That was my biggest fear of my entire life. Like
public speaking?
It crippled me physically. It was like a visceral, but it was like a visceral response. Like, would you get blotchy or sweaty or stutter?
I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do it. I would avoid it at all costs.
Yeah. So when I was at UM, I double majored in psychology and communications. And by the way, I picked the communications because I just had to. For what I wanted to do, they're like, you need a double major. So just pick something. So I picked and I'm like, okay, cool. So I ended up needing public speaking for the communications portion. And man, I did the same thing that everyone else did. They waited till last semester of senior year to take the class. And it was like, I would get sick. I was nauseous. And finally I broke it.
So
it was
what would happen?
class.
I didn't mean to interrupt you before.
No,
what would happen physically when you were wanting to speak?
The words wouldn't come out, or I would stutter or get stuck, and I would start to get blotchy all over my neck. And so because it became very obvious, people would start looking at me funny, which made it worse. And
that would happen during a speech, right? Not in anticipation of it, but while you were talking.
While I was talking. The class was about 30 people, so it was very intimate. And I actually found myself to be inspired as I was learning how to break through the fear, because our instructor she overcame a stuttering deficit, or whatever you want to call it. And you would see her work through the stutter beautifully when she was communicating. And I was like, if she can do that in front of people, and I don't have that, I can totally do this. And so we had about 6 speeches that entire semester. And my favorite one, I ended up having a favorite one, was persuasive speech, enough to take more classes on the art of persuasion. And cool. then that connected to my strength in sales, which is, again, not intentional. And so I started to gather all this feedback, and then the fact that I don't like working for other people or other people telling me what to do. And I'm like, I'm gonna start a business. I made all those connections during that public speaking class. It was such a breakthrough for me because not only did I overcome the strength, because I literally had to put myself out there and work through it, but because I also discovered that it was a strength. So
that public speaking was a strength.
Correct.
So one of the interesting things about that, this was the case with me, but tell me if it was the case with you,
Okay.
that developing public speaking also forced you to work on your confidence as well, build your own confidence.
Yep, totally. That's why, again, none of this was intentional, but then I saw it pay off in those areas you're talking about, my communication and my confidence, where now it's like at any chance that I get to speak in front of a crowd or do something like this, I'm like, yes, more.
It's interesting because it's something that I've always encouraged, not always, but recently encouraged a lot of my guys at work to speak. I mentioned the speech that Mendy did where he spoke about the story where I broke a wall. So that was a speech on a stage that Mendy prepared for. And I remember the first one that Mendy worked on, he got nervous before and was reading from notes. And then he did a second one and a third one. And each time he joined, and I never realized until this conversation why I liked public speaking so much as an area of investment for people is because it bridges those two, communications and confidence.
You said it. And I'm going to offer a tip for everyone watching that worked for me with public speaking. And I still use it till today because don't get me wrong, before I go on a stage, like I had to speak in front of 150 people in December, which is not like a huge number, but it's a lot more than what I'm used to. I still, I'll get nervous like the first 30 seconds and then I'll get over it. But I'll use it. I'll tell myself in my head, Angie, you know that the only reason why people get nervous before they speak is because they make it about them. And it's not about me, it's about the message. So when you make it about yourself, you're going to worry about how you sound, how you look, whether your armpits are sweating, whether this sounds good or you're speaking too high or speaking too low. When you're focused on what these people came here for, the message, it's kind of like the pressure comes off a little bit because it's not about you.
Right.
That helps me tremendously.
Yeah, the self-consciousness does not work very well for communication, right? Thinking a lot about oneself. So someone asked a question here, which I want to address. I have a lot of experience with the 12 steps, but I don't totally understand the question. So if they want to flesh it out a little bit, but the question reads, when a person addresses his life problem through the 12 steps, for example, losing a lot of weight through OA, and they want to build a business helping others, what are the potential problems and stumbling blocks? So I mean, maybe you can address this, not the 12 steps portion, but what were some of the challenges that you had to go through going from addressing your own areas that you needed to work on, emotional intelligence, confidence building, public speaking, binge eating, stress eating, all of those things, to then transition to, okay, now I got it enough, I can help others with it.
So the thing that helps me help others is also the same thing that became an obstacle, which is getting understanding how that mind works of a person with addiction, especially when it comes to food. So I know very well firsthand how it works. So a lot of times when I get met with resistance from clients, I know immediately where it's coming from. And there are many times in the past, it would happen more often where I would get triggered because I remember what it was like to be in that state. So I had to learn how to manage my emotions a lot better and separate myself a lot more. Where like, this isn't you. And just because it took you this long, it's not going to take them that long. And I had to really just stop personalizing it, where even though we share this in common and I'm helping you overcome it, it doesn't mean that it's going to look exactly like how it did for me. It could actually look better or it could actually look worse. So I guess to answer the question directly, what are some things that you can experience? Possibly being triggered yourself. So you have to acknowledge when you're being triggered and know how to work through triggers, which I think is very important. It's a big part of EQ. And also the part where you know how that mind works very well. So you have to know how to be very empathetic towards that person, because you know exactly how they think and the stories they'll make up, or how they'll rationalize things. So I think that in and of itself could be a big obstacle. It's kind of like when parents
It
have
can be.
kids.
Wouldn't that be a help? Knowing the way their mind works?
Yes, it can be a help, but it can also be an obstacle, because, okay, so there were many times where
Can
I
you
would
cut
go
to the end too quickly?
say it again.
You can end up cutting to the end too quickly, like instead of allowing someone the process of working it
Yes.
through.
Yes. So
That's
it's
what you mean.
kind of like, and it can feel disheartening as a coach, because I'm like, I know why he's meeting me with resistance, or I know why she's saying this, because I was there. And it sucks to hear it, because you want to help them, but sometimes you just got to let them do their thing. So it can feel, because that mind well, it can feel very discouraging and disheartening sometimes, but you just have to trust the process and trust the process.
It's what you alluded to at the beginning of the conversation, where you were talking about people's patterns, right? So you'll write it down, and you'll probably notice by the second one already what the pattern is, but you'll have to wait a little bit longer to say, hey, I've seen you bring this, got it.
And I just gave away one of my little secrets.
Right. So you answered the question in two ways. Is one is not personalized, and that makes sense to me, because the only example I really have with it is the sponsorship in 12 Steps, where the first couple people I sponsored, I took it very personal when they had success or when they had failures.
There you go.
Learning not to was important. I thought it was my journey. And then if someone was in it for a couple of months and then they left and they were no longer interested, I did something wrong. And
you said it.
They're addicts. Right.
That is correct.
So that was the first part.
Yes.
And then the second is trying to jump too quickly to the right.
Yeah.
Okay. Hopefully we answered that question.
Tracy.
So any last thoughts before we hop off? This is a very interesting conversation for me.
I know we can talk forever about. I can talk forever about this too. I think that I would love to see everyone at some point in this chat, if you haven't already, at some point, not only invest in their personal development, but specifically in their emotional intelligence, because it really takes you such a long way. There's so many elements of it that are just so fascinating and can really help with leadership skills and even in creating money, where something I talk about is distorted thinking. We talked about this on our phone call, where even that alone, if you can call yourself out when you are exhibiting a certain style of distorted thinking and versus being oblivious to it, that can really come a long way. I'll have conversations nowadays where I'm like, damn it, there I go doing that again. I would have never been able to do that 6-7 years ago. So just understanding that if you want to have more fulfilling relationships, more fulfilling role in your job, more meaningful things going on in your life, this is a big component of it, where I just think it's required on all levels. And unfortunately, it's not something that they teach in school. I've seen some colleges offer it as an elective, but that's as far as it goes.
Gotcha. In terms of, in recovery from addiction, the 12 steps, the second step reads, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity, right? Which the implication is that we're insane. And it's always interesting, the first step is admitting that we have a problem with an addiction, which is a huge step. But the second step is the admission on some level that we're insane.
Yeah.
So that can be a tough one, but the
I
ability
was just going to say, would you like to?
Go ahead.
I was going to say, would you like to leave anyone with anything as well? I would like to hear.
What I'd like to ask you is specifically in emotional intelligence. If someone wants to learn more, and I'm intrigued to learn more about it, you mentioned Daniel Goldman's book. Is there anything else? Or that's where you would recommend someone starting?
I would like to start there. I would say to start there, and I would say to start with The Power of the Subconscious Mind as well, from Joseph Murphy.
Those two books.
Yeah, definitely. 100%. And also, there is a course that is very, it's not very long. I think it's like a 6-week masterclass type of thing that is sold on positivepsychology.com. I love them as a resource. I like a lot of what they put out. That there's a specific course on emotional intelligence that I would recommend. And then one more for couples and relationships. And I can attest to this directly because my boyfriend and I just came back from the seminar in February. Are you familiar with the Gottman Institute?
I am, yeah.
Okay.
John Gottman?
So
yeah.
I like them a lot. And I actually got to experience everything that they teach firsthand in a full immersion, 2 days. I've never read their books. So I just took the workshop on, I think it's called The Art and Science of Love. So it's a very scientific based approach as well, which I love. I'm kind of like a nerd when it comes to those things. And it helps a lot with conflict management, which I think a lot of the stuff I learned, it helps too in business relationships.
So I'm just going to put what you're saying in the chat. You said The Power of the Subconscious Mind by Joseph
Murphy.
And you'll tell me if once I put it in, if anything needs to be corrected. And the book is called Emotional Intelligence by Daniel Goleman, right?
I'm not sure if that's the exact title, but you can put his name. I don't want to
I think that's
say that. I think so.
Okay, I'll put it in the...
Here, and I can put...
And the work of...
positivepsychology.com Emotional Intelligence Masterclass.
Cool.
Yeah.
And in terms of my notes, my thoughts, I guess final thoughts. I mean, I'm a huge proponent of it for businesses, like I said, for people to grow, not only in terms of making more money, which is not always linear. Like I said, there are pitfalls, quote unquote, and I've spoken to very wealthy people and had these conversations, and they have a fear that if they do invest heavily in this kind of work, they may lose their edge in business.
Mm-hmm.
And right, I hear that. At the same point in time, I think there's no better investment someone can make than the work, than building themselves up. If for no other reason, then for most of us, the reason we want money is for the peace of mind and the security that money brings.
Absolutely.
And there's no better way to get peace of mind than to work on the mind and to work on the personal development. I also think that it's the reason we're here on the planet. I think
yes.
It's to do that and to refine ourselves as human beings and to be better people. So
you mentioned Warren Buffett as well. And he talks about obviously money a lot, but he talks about money and emotions. And one of his most famous sayings is, if you don't know how to manage your emotions, you'll never know how to manage your money.
It's not a good, it's actually amazing to me about the stock market when you talk about the trillions of dollars that are in there and how emotionally reactive it seems to be sometimes.
I hear it all the time. I'm not even. Yes. Right. I don't see this every day, but a lot of my clients, this is just what they do and what they're into. And everything that you just said verbatim, you sound like one of them. One of my clients that's always saying this.
Yeah, I follow it perfectly. I'm not very heavily focused on it, but I've always noticed that when something happens, and I'll give one analogy and then we'll hang this up. So about 6 or 7 years ago, I got a Tesla. And when I did, I was like, whoa, this car is amazing. This is going to be the car of the future. I felt like I was using an iPhone for the first time. There's no way that people aren't going to want this. It's connected. It's, spacious. It has so much more space in the trunk. It doesn't have to deal with all the gas stuff. It just made so much sense. So I bought some stock in Tesla. And within 3 or 4 months, it was up like 60, 70%. And then one day it dropped just tremendously, like 30 or 40%, which is billions of dollars that came out of the stock. And what caused it was several Teslas that got on fire. And the media covered these stories of like 3 or 4 Teslas. And it didn't take more than a little bit of research to realize that if they were covering the amount of Chevys or Fords or BMWs that went on fire, you you would very quickly see that there were many more of those that went on fire than Teslas. But 3 stories about Teslas, and suddenly people with billions of dollars emotionally reacting and pulling out the money. And to me, it was so curious. I was like, wow, people are really making decisions based on something like the picture of a car on fire. And I guess that's what Warren Buffett always said. He doesn't try to time the market. That's not his goal. His goal is to buy companies that he likes and almost never sell. Like I saw recently that he sold some airlines, and it's very rare for him to sell. That's not his that's not his approach. His approach is to buy companies he likes and not think about it, because on the day-to-day basis, it's very emotionally reactive. So I guess it comes full circle that working on our emotions, working on our neutrality, working on that ability to have clear decision making and not be triggered so emotionally reactive is a better business decision. And obviously, like I said earlier, that combination of working on confidence and working on communication, there's no question to me that's directly related. And just we'll end on this note with Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett told a room full of people, I think it was at a college speech in front of college students, that he'll give anyone in the room $100,000 for 10% of the future earnings. But if they know how to speak publicly, he'll up it by 50%. He'll give them $150,000.
Damn. Damn. Okay, I would have loved to have been part of that room.
I wouldn't. Yeah, 10%. Don't sell 10% for that much.
Right.
10% is worth a lot more. But
oh, this was awesome, Eli. I appreciate it a lot.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And people can reach you at angiesanchez.life.
Correct. That is my direct email address, Angie@angiesanchez.life.
Or your website, angiesanchez.life.
Correct.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Angie. Have a great evening.
Thank you. Bye, Eli.
Take care. Bye.